Downhill bikes are the F1 cars of mountain biking, meticulously engineered with one job in mind: go downhill as fast as possible for one run, designed regardless of climbing ability or rider comfort. I'm here with MBUK's technical editor-in-chief, Rob Weaver.
Hello.
To discuss which downhill bikes have the richest history and have stood the test of time to stay at the top of the pile. These are the top 5 most iconic downhill bikes you can own in the present day. You're in for a treat today because there's nothing we like more than nerding out about downhill bikes. So Rob, what makes a great downhill bike?
Good question. So, first and foremost, it has to be the geometry. The geometry is the foundation of the bike. If that's wrong, it doesn't matter how good the suspension or any of the parts bolted to it is, it will be rubbish, quite simply. Next up, suspension. Now that is critical. If your suspension doesn't work properly, the chances are you're going to be upside down and into the bushes outside of the racetrack, and you're never going to win anything. It's got to ensure you get the traction you need, but it's also got to absorb massive impacts down the track. Aside from that, you've got things like frame stiffness to take into account. If a bike is too stiff, then it's going to be too hard to ride. It won't track the corners and the terrain as easily as it could. And then we've also got things like durability. If a bike snaps in half halfway down a racetrack, waste of time. Ain't going to win you anything. And then also, on top of all of that, especially important for any privateers out there, it has to be easy to work on. If you can't access something or it uses something that's particularly proprietary, so it's a one-off for that particular bike, and you can't get it on a race weekend, then your weekend's over. So you're kind of screwed.
So it sounds like the engineers have got their work cut out for them, Rob.
Absolutely will, yep, definitely.
Before we go into the first bike, don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Right, without further ado, the first bike on the list is the GT Fury.
Whee.
Whee. So, were you at the launch of this bike?
Not the original.
Right.
I went to the one after they'd signed the Athertons. After GT had signed the Athertons, and they totally remade the bike. I don't know if you remember, the original Fury was carbon, swoopy lines.
Yeah, very futuristic looking.
Yes, and I think it came out around 2009. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think so.
Right?
I trust you.
Yeah, rather conservative geometry, if you recall, especially when you consider Fabien Barrel won in 2009 on the first prototype Mondraker Summon. So super slack, really long bike, and at the time the Fury was compact, I would say, putting it in the nicest possible terms. They then moved on to the 2013 bike, so that was launched in 2012 with the Atherton's help.
Well, hang on, I've got to stop you there because we've got to talk about the race result on that first bike.
Well, yes, so probably the biggest result of note was Mark Beaumont, so former MBUK rider, and he won in Val d'Isole, which is an iconic racetrack and one of the toughest on the circuits.
So that bike was race proven straight away.
Yeah, even though obviously I've already slated its geometry, it clearly still went fast with the right rider on, right?
And then they got more of the right riders. They brought the Athertons on board.
An entire family of them, no less. They took the bike and completely overhauled it. The only thing that really sort of remained the same, more or less, was the name. It was a very different bike.
And the iDrive.
Of course, yeah, okay, and the suspension system. But the way that bike rode, I'm not sure if you ever slung a leg over one.
I didn't know.
That thing was super stiff. So a very unforgiving ride. Maybe not so bad for the likes of Rach and G and Dan. And that stiffness for some was maybe a little bit too much, as we saw with some of the later riders after the Atherton team moved on.
And we should just say there that Rob's not talking about the stiffness of the spring or the suspension, he's on about the torsional stiffness of the bike.
Yeah, so how almost rigid that frame is side to side as you're going through turns, and how it would kind of beat you up a little bit. It was quite a lot to hold on to. It was a big, fast, stiff bike, and you really had to muscle that bike around. It wasn't particularly forgiving, so you can imagine over a really long track, it kind of beats you up a bit. But in 2018, GT switched it up entirely, moved to a different suspension layout, back to carbon fibre, ditched the iDrive, and went to bigger wheels. 27.5 in the first instance, and then we've seen 29 since. And for 2023, GT have evolved that design further, right?
Yeah, so it's looking similar to the bike from 2019, but they seem to have listened to the rider feedback, and now the new bike has a split seat tube with a rocker inside it, and you said the riders have been feeding back some really positive stuff.
Yeah, from what I've heard, it's all moving in the right direction, and unfortunately Ethan, their main team rider at the minute, is out with injury, but prior to that he seemed like he was really on a roll. So fingers crossed we're going to see him and the rest of the team right back up there this year.
In at number 4, it's Giant's Glory.
So Giant Glory introduced 2006. I know because I had one, raced on it.
Enjoyed it?
I loved it. Wicked bike, brilliant bike, apart from the fact it would kill the DU bushes. So the little mounts that sit inside of the shock, this thing, because of the amount of rotation on it, destroyed them. A day in the Alps and they're gone. So yeah, but a wicked bike. Yep. Really, really good bike. Took the Maestro suspension system from the Trance, Rain and Faith bikes from a couple of years previous to that.
I had a Faith, yeah.
Yeah, I have the Faith too. I'm sure it's fine. And then revamped in 2010, and I think probably everyone and their grandmother would remember Danny Hart's run from Chambéry 2011, when he took home the World Champs title and won by 11 seconds? Was it 11 seconds?
Can't remember, but it was definitely on a Glory.
Yes. Massive whip over the penultimate jump.
Warner got very excited, lost his voice.
Yeah, one of the most historic runs of all time, I think it's fair to say. And obviously, you know, he couldn't have done it without obviously having a great bike, right? Yeah. So Giant then revamped that bike again in 2015 and moved to the slightly bigger 27.5 wheels. And a couple of years down the line after that, we went to the mixed wheel size bike. They've since started bolstering their downhill team a bit. And as we've both been looking at the new pictures of that 2023 bike, which is amazing. That top spec bike, if anyone hasn't seen it, it takes on the paint job of the classic 1998 Giant ATX1, which was an incredible bike. Miles Rockwell won on, did he win on that in Sierra Nevada, 2001? Yeah.
Warner came second on it, and they call it the Legends paint job.
Yes, it was an incredible, I mean, it looks super cool. And so what do you know about the new bike then, Will?
So apart from the Legends paint job, it's got adjustable reach via headset cups, nice. It's got adjustable chainstays via chainstay chips, and it will take either wheel size.
Nice, very cool. So very, very up to date, and it should hopefully be maybe a podium contender again?
Oh, let's hope so.
Fingers crossed.
And number 3, looks like a Session.
It is a Session!
Yeah, Trek Session, their flagship downhill bike, in at number 3.
Yes, so the Trek Session started life as the Session 7 in 2005.
Yeah.
Became the Session 10 in 2006, used the high pivot design.
Yeah, high pivot with an idler.
From, what was the bike?
The Diesel.
The Diesel, 2003 bike.
It's going way back, this is.
Yes. Then moved on to the Session 88 in 2009, I think.
Which looks much more like the Session you can buy today.
Yes, and it was the first bike to use ABP, the active braking pivot. I should know, I had one.
What was it like?
Wicked, super light. That was the first thing that really stood out. Super light, really well priced. Now, rumour has it that someone at Trek may have made a whoopsie with the pricing on that bike, which is why it was such a bargain.
It was a bargain.
Yeah, at the time, it was head and shoulders above pretty much everything else you could get. And I mean, we're talking a weight of around, what, 34 to 36 pounds, I think?
Which would stand up today.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of light, to be fair, almost too light. Now, the Session has had a lot of success. Obviously, our very own Tracy Mosley, she won lots of World Cup races on that bike, including the World Championships in 2010, followed by Aaron Gwynn, who obviously destroyed the field in 2011 on the full carbon version of this bike.
The 9.9.
The 9.9. And then the likes of Rachel Atherton, who had an unbeaten year of racing. It was a year and a bit maybe, wasn't it? 2016, went all the way through to 2017.
Yeah, 2016. Totally the year I was mechanicking for Trek. So yeah, I was in the pits just watching, just win. It was incredible.
Amazing. So clearly a bike that works. Clearly, you know, it's stood the test of time for a good reason then.
Yeah, and the suspension system, still very similar to that original Session 88, with one crucial change though.
And that is?
Idler wheel and high pivot.
Yeah, there you go. So it kind of has gone full circle back to the
Yeah.
high pivot of old.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it's fair to say it's one of those bikes where it's got a reputation for really working well. And I've heard that pros have, in the off-season, gone out and actually ridden this bike, bought the bike, and then are using it as a development tool to build their race bikes around almost.
That's quite the compliment.
Kind of sets the standard, right? So, yeah, totally deserves to be in the list, right?
Yeah, and that whole looks like a Session meme is because people have been using that bike as an inspiration to make downhill bikes that work.
Exactly. So there's a good reason why it's still being ridden to such success. Junior rider Bodie Kuhn won Val di Sole this year. Loris Vergier still knocking on the door, top 5s, top 10s consistently. It's clearly a bike that works.
In at number 2, it's the Specialized Demo.
Yes, so this bike, I think I first saw kicking around about 2003. And I mean, visually that is quite a striking machine, right? It has that twin seat stay design. So the inside rear triangle, if you could call it that, is activating the shock, all in a bid to try and isolate pedal and suspension forces.
Yeah, it didn't look like anything else, did it?
It really didn't. And it weighed a ton from what people told me. I never rode one of those. I didn't ride the original. At first, I think it was very much a free ride-y sort of / park bike.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later it began to evolve and sort of become a race bike. Slightly more svelte and refined design. And then obviously those guys signed the likes of Sam Hill, Brendan, Troy Brosnan. And
then the Demo 8.2 was born.
So after Sam Hill and Brendan Fairclough had moved on, Troy Brosnan was still there. Aaron Gwynn came to join him after a couple of really massive seasons on Trek. They then started working on the new bike, which used the asymmetrical design and a concentric pivot to the bottom bracket. So gone was that complicated double seat stay, crazy kind of FSR design, and what came out of it was what looked like an industrial designer's dream. I think that single-sided asymmetric design just looked super sleek, and so, I mean, I got to ride that bike a few times and I loved it. It was a really cool bike.
And it clearly worked because Gwynn went on a winning streak, winning 9 World Cups between 2015 and 2018 and winning the overall 3 times on the bound.
And he could do it without a rear tyre and without a chain. So then in 2016, we have the powerhouse that is Loic Bruni. Super Bruni signing to the team. With that, they get the whole management structure, his amazing mechanic, and they went to work, didn't they? And the new demo came out, 429, much to their dislike.
Because what were the team riders running?
They wanted to run a smaller back wheel. They didn't like the big 29ers. Maybe they have tiny little legs like me. Who knows?
Well, it certainly works.
Well, yeah, and 2022 we see Finn on the new prototype bike, which is what Luke's been racing this year. And we're not totally sure what's going on with that, as we speculated in our video that we last sit down and talked about, but it looks cool. There's some really interesting things going on, but who knows what's going on under that special cover.
Watch this space. And in gold medal position at number 1, it's Santa Cruz with the V10.
Now, the V10, 8 iterations of the same named bike.
The first one coming out in 2002, over 20 years ago.
Yep, and probably important to point out, it's called a V10, 10 inches, 255 millimeters of travel. So the original had that brake arm, I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, the float and brake.
To try and isolate the braking forces on the suspension so it stayed active while you're on the brakes. They ditched that when they moved to the Mark II version.
A much more rounded looking bike, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that is the bike that Steve Peat, when he signed to Santa Cruz, won his 3rd overall World Cup title on.
In 2006.
Yes. Not long after that, they moved to the Mark III. Greg Menard joins and goes on, obviously, to win billions of races.
Yeah,
God knows how many.
literally
Loads, right?
billions.
Literally billions. Also, on that Mark III, didn't Steve win Worlds in 2009, is that right?
Yeah, Canberra is world champs win.
Yes, I think Rob Warner probably lost his voice
Oh, yeah.
commentating on that. I
was
remember getting
emotional.
up, yeah, I got up super early because obviously with the time difference, I think I got up at like 4 in the morning to try and watch it. Amazing race. Brings a tear to the eye just thinking about it now. Then in 2011, they switched to the Mark IV version, which is a full carbon bike with adjustable travel, so between 8 and 10 inches of travel, so possibly a bit more manageable.
And then the next generation had bigger wheels.
Did indeed.
So the V10.5, 27.5 inch wheels and 8 inch travel only, because you had that bigger wheel to get in there.
Yes. And who won a lot of races on that year?
Is that Bryson? Ah, so interestingly enough, Bryson started out the year he won the World Cup overall, which was 2014. He started off with a 26-inch wheel bike, and then he switched mid-season to the newer bike with the 27.5-inch wheels.
That guy that year felt like he was just unstoppable. And it wasn't until that massive crash at Worlds, when he smashed his foot, that all of a sudden it all came to an end, really. I know he still had a bit of success after that, but he was on a roll that year.
He just picked whatever line he wanted to ride and just rode it faster than everyone else. It was incredible.
It was amazing. Then if you remember back to 2017, first race of the year, Lourdes, France, out of nowhere, Santa Cruz roll out on 29-inch wheels. There was a lot of talk of it in the pits. Some of the pro riders weren't too happy that others had come out and brought this wheel size into the sport of downhill, but it clearly worked for them.
And over the rest of the year, other riders were putting 29-inch wheels into their bikes and trying to compensate the geometry to suit, and Santa Cruz started it all.
Yeah, it was incredible. Of course, then we've got Greg Minnaert winning the 2021 Val di Sole World Championship, so his 4th World Championship title on the Mark VII frame, which is the frame that you can currently go out and buy now. But, as we've seen this year, there's a Mark VIII frame.
There's a new one.
I mean, it looks pretty much finished, right?
It looks pretty production, yeah.
So we don't know all the ins and outs about that, but regardless, an 8th iteration is almost ready to go. So I suppose watch this space, but it looks like it's working.
Yeah, Nina and Laurie, Greg and Jackson all making that bike really work underneath them.
Yeah, and it's going to be amazing to see what those guys can do on that for the rest of this season.
So there you have it. 5 of the most iconic downhill bikes of all time, which have successfully evolved and reinvented themselves to be at the cutting edge of technology to this day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and let us know what your favourite downhill icons are in the comments.